Hello, and welcome to the How to Tell Your Story session. Cyril Rachetta will hold the session for us. Cyril is a solutions-focused strategic thinker with extensive international experience in communications and training. He started his career in the management side of the retail sector, where he developed outstanding interpersonal skills and customer understanding. He traveled to New York to promote Swiss research and innovation in North America and run accelerating programs for Swiss startups. He later moved to the pharma industry, joining the Patient Relations and Communications Department of Novartis Oncology in Basel, where he supported the development of a mutually beneficial dialogue between the industry and advocacy groups in Asia Pacific, the Middle East, and Africa. More recently, Cyril has been helping his clients solve their communications challenges as part of the team at Audience Communications and Events, a global strategic and creative communications agency. In 2022, Cyril started his communications consultancy business with the purpose of helping individuals grow and companies to shine while delivering tangible business results. Cyril was brought up in Switzerland, and he holds a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science in Management from the University of Lausanne, specialized in organizational behavior. He lives in Basel, Switzerland.
Thank you very much, Zoe. Thank you very much, Jeanette, for having me here today. Hi, everybody. How is everybody doing today? It's a long day, isn't it? Yeah. Well, it's my great pleasure to be here today for the next 90 minutes and teach you a little bit how to tell your story. So Zoe kind of like, that should work.
Sorry.
Zoe spoiled a little bit my introduction, but I think it's important for you to know who's standing in front of you. So here's my life on the slide. So as Zoe mentioned, I was born and raised in Switzerland. I live in Basel in Switzerland. My mother tongue is French. Obviously, I speak English and a little bit of German as well. I've been working in the communications field for the past 7 years. In communications and communications training. And the first encounter that I had with storytelling was in the United States when I was working with entrepreneurs that needed to pitch their ideas to investors to get their first rounds of seed investment. So a lot of polishing the elevator pitch a little bit. And then, as I mentioned in my bio as well, it's not the first time I'm working with patient groups. I did work in patient relations for Novartis in oncology for 1.5 years. And I also worked with Roche on the AIPO event, for those of you who are familiar with the event. The little lighthouse on the slide, it's my purpose. My purpose is to help individuals to grow and companies to shine. And that's what I want to do today. I want to help you shine with telling better stories. A little bit of a personal story about myself. I've been skiing since I was 3. I haven't missed a single year since then. And the mountains is my happy place. So at the moment, Switzerland is experiencing a heat wave. So this keeps me a bit fresh. There we go. A few housekeeping rules. First of all, there's no formal break planned in the next 90 minutes. So take a break when you need it. Okay, I know it's a long day. I know if you need to refresh, if you need to take a walk, I won't be offended if you leave your place and you go for a few steps. Timekeeping, apart from training you, my role is also to keep us on track. So I might be a bit ruthless on occasions with the exercises, for example, to make sure that you can move to the next part of your program on time. You may know recordings in progress for training purposes. I presume most of the conference has been recorded so far. I hope it's not a problem. If it's a problem for anybody, raise your hand now. Perfect. During the next 90 minutes, I will be using the words presentation and story in the same meaning, okay? I know there's a debate. Is a story presentation, is a presentation a story? For the purpose of the next 90 minutes, they will mean the same thing. Today, we're lucky to have a hybrid audience. So I've got all of your lovely faces in the room, but I do also have a couple of people on the Zoom. Welcome. So I'm going to try to manage both you and you. And because we're working with technology, it might be that on occasion technology might fail, and that's totally okay. So for those of you on the Zoom, if you suddenly experience issues, usually the best way to troubleshoot it is just log off, and then you log back in. And if you still have issues, we've got technical support here to help you. Questions are welcome anytime. So if you've got a question, feel free to raise your hand. I believe Amy and Zoe are monitoring the chat as well for the Zoom. So if you've got a question, just type it in the chat. If you need me to repeat, again, English is not my native language, so I might be a bit wonky on occasions. Just let me know, I'll be happy to make the point again. And then last but not least, this is a safe space, okay? We're going to be workshopping a little bit. We're going to be sharing personal elements. And I want to make sure that everything which is said in this room stays in this room, right? And that everybody feels comfortable sharing with the rest of the team. How does that sound? Good? Perfect. All right. My objective today is to equip you with a set of tools and techniques so that you can craft a story which is tailored to the need of the people you're talking to, that you can bring back home. And I want to make a disclaimer here. It's only a set of tools and techniques. When it comes to storytelling and presentation development, there's thousands of models. We're going to see 2 today. I'm not saying they're the best, but they are useful and easy enough to bring back home. Okay? Now I want to get the energy in the room a bit up. So a short energizer for the next 2 minutes. You've been sitting in this room for the past 2 days. I'm sure you went through amazing, amazing presentations. I want you to turn to your partner next to you. It should be easy enough. If you're 3, you can stay 3. And just share with your partner, what is your highlight of the conference so far? Okay? And same with you on the Zoom. Amy will put you in pairs and you can share. I presume Amy will put you in pairs.
Sorry, I was being sarcastic.
That's all right. Perfect. All right. I'll put a timer on. I'll give you 2 minutes and I'll let you share with your partners what is your highlight of the conference so far.
I think one highlight it's nice to have size for a conversation or the interest of
When your camera broke down? Oh, yeah.
All right, that makes 2 minutes. Thank you very much. I hope that was you got some nice learnings from your partners about their highlights of the conference. Let's move on to the agenda for the next 90 minutes. So I'll start with a short introduction on why is it important to tell stories? What are the elements of great presentations? and we'll look at a little model that will help you elevate the impact of your communications and engage your audience. Then we'll move to what I call the audience. So we look at who you're talking to, what is it that they want to hear, right? And why would they want to listen to you? And then we'll move further down to the content, and we look at how we can select the pieces of content that will be relevant to the people you're speaking to and the objectives that you're trying to reach. And if time permits, and time will permit, we'll talk a little bit about delivery. Another disclaimer here, this is not a class about delivery, right? It's more about content building and story building. All right. I want you to think about 2 presentations. And they can be anything. They can be your board meeting, they can be a news anchor, it can be a presidential address, it can be, I don't know, last Sunday at the barbecue, you name it. I want you to think about 1 presentation that you found extremely good and 1 presentation that you found absolutely terrible. Okay? And for that presentation that you found really, really good, I want you to tell me what made it so great. So I'm just going to flip chart a little bit. Whatever comes to your mind. Passion. Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Actal. Like there was a bit of light, life, sorry, yeah?
Not too long. So Cyril, if you could repeat everything people say in the microphone, then if you could repeat when they say something.
Yes, yeah. So short, yeah? Say it. Oh, emotions, yes. Emotions.
And not too much text on presentation.
Is that too much? I'm going to call this light slides. Yeah, perfect. Yes? Design? Ah, okay, like images, visuals. Yeah. It's a bit of tension, or
Not boring.
I would be curious to see what makes it not boring.
Like without emotions, like blah, 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 that's all.
So variation in your tone, for example. Yes? Clean. Clear. Thank you. It's a big room.
Looking at the subject from a point of view I never heard before.
D'accord. So new perspective. Okay, perfect. Amy, do we have anything coming through the Zoom? A perspective. Yes?
Also focus on the audience.
Focus
The
on the...
level of the audience or whatever you want.
Yes. Okay. I'm gonna focus on the audience. It means being engaged, looking at you, considering
No, I
you.
mean, if you have, for example, I don't know, here we are patient, you cannot arrive here with so many details of how sales it's working, for example.
Okay.
Or if you are going to the chief officer, you cannot go with many details.
That's perfect because you're preempting exactly what we're going to do today. So that's perfect.
Personality of lecture.
Act personality. It's okay if you can't read it. Interactions. All right. I'll need to move on now. That's a great list of elements that makes great presentations, great stories.
From online.
From online.
Participants, we have easy to understand vocabulary.
Okay.
Good company of people.
Ah,
And the person's personality showing through.
yeah, we have it here. Yeah. Okay, so now switching gear, thinking of that terrible presentation. Why was it so bad? Yes.
Too many emotions.
Too many emotions. Thank you. There was somebody next to you? Okay. Unprepared. And again, you're making a point I'm going to make later. It's great. Yes, please. Just reading your slide. Yes.
We've also got online, we've got unrelatable and vague ideas.
I'll come to you in a sec.
Being outside of your time, so you're starting the time and end time is working.
So,
Start there.
poor time management. Okay. I need to keep an eye on that. Amy, you were saying?
I've stolen the mic off Amy. Sorry.
And Emmy's left the room.
Yes. So I was stressed.
Stressed,
Unrelatable,
unrelatable,
and vague ideas.
and then vague.
Boring.
What makes it so boring? Long, long, long. Okay, so I'll take one last and then I'll move on. Yes, please. Yeah, that's a good one. Abbreviation. Okay, great. So the reason why I wanted to do this with you right now was to put you in the right frame of mind, right? To think about what makes a great presentation, what makes a not so great presentation. And so later on, when you're going to craft your story, keep these elements in mind, right? So bring as much as the good stuff in it and leave out as much as the bad stuff as you can, okay? Don't try to read it, it's way too small, but we'll make sure that we have all of this on a slide afterwards for when you leave. Okay, so I'm putting this aside. Why tell stories? So today is not a class about storytelling. So for those of you who are very well familiar with storytelling, this is not your typical storytelling class that you might expect. But just wanting to say a few words on why it's important to tell stories. The first reason is because we're all natural born storytellers, right? Our brains have evolved since millions of years, right? To tell and hear stories. That's the way our brains are wired. And so it's a very, very natural way for us to share content and a message, all right? And stories in themselves are very powerful for four main reasons. The first one, they're easy to remember. And we'll see there's a couple of elements of stories that make them easy to remember, okay? They're also portable. And what I mean by portable is that they can start here in Leuven, but then they can travel all the way back to your home country, right? And because they're memorable and portable, they're also very easy to repeat. So you can be the one originating the story, but then you can have other people telling your story, right? And benefiting from this snowball effect. And the last one is universality. And what I mean by universality is that everybody, wherever you are, understands them. So for example, if we take The Lion King, right? Everybody from the US to China understands the story of The Lion King and enjoys it in the same way. So that's what I mean by being universal. They're memorable because they have a clear structure. Generally speaking, stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we'll see later how can you maximize your beginning, your middle, and your end. Okay, and then there's elements, key elements of a story that again help them making memorable and repeatable. Right? They all have characters. There's heroes, villains. If you think of Star Wars, right? They have a moral. They teach a lesson. Right? Stories serve a purpose. There's a quest usually. So a hero goes on a quest, goes through challenges. There's a bit of tension. You mentioned it before, right? Up and downs, not flat. Right? There's a bit of details, not too many, and I'll give you a tip later on to make sure you don't put too many details, but just enough, right? And there's a bit of dialogue, right? Okay, so that was just a taster about why it is important to tell stories. Now, this is the first model that I want to introduce you to, and it's fairly simple. It's called the audience triangle, and that's a model that I've been using in the past 5 years at the agency where I was working before. And this is how it works. We always start with the top, which is the audience. We always start with the audience in mind, AKA, who are you talking to, right? And we start by asking ourselves, what is it that they want to hear, right? Why would they want to listen to me? And once you've got this clarified, you move down to the presenter, and the presenter is you. And usually, when you go into a room to give a presentation or tell your story, you've got a purpose and an objective. You're not doing this for nothing, okay? And once you know who you're talking to and why you're talking to them, that will naturally flow into the type of content that you're going to share with your audience, okay? That might be a bit fuzzy, but you'll see as we work with it, it becomes quite easy. Now, the reason why I find it really interesting and important is the natural tendency for most people is to start with the content of the story. I have a story to share, right? And then you move to yourself, and that's why I want to share my story. And then you move up to the audience, it's like, and I'm going to tell the story to somebody. So this just flips the process on their end, on its head, right? And start with the audience first. So, know your audience. You need to ask yourself the question, okay, who are you talking to? Are you talking to other lupus patients? Are you talking to technical issues? Are you talking to their families and their carers? Are you talking to academia? Are you talking to the pharma industry, any other people, right? And is it doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, people from patient engagement teams? And I think we can all agree that the story you're going to tell to a doctor might be very, very different than the story you might tell to somebody from a patient engagement team in the industry. So once you know who you're talking to, another useful question to ask yourself is, what is their level of knowledge? Are they experts? Do they know a lot? Do they know just a little? Or do they know nothing? And this will help you select the level of depth of the content that you're going to put in your story. Are you with me so far? Yes? That's all right.
Quick comment around the audience, because many times we might know with our audience, let's say a doctor, but I think what we're struggling is, do we empathize with that person? Do we understand where they stand? When should we reach out to them? Like understanding the specific audience, not, okay, we know it's a doctor, they know many things, but do we understand how is their daily life? Like, through what is their journey? Understanding that specific audience more rather than knowing what is the audience, it's one thing, but understanding what they're doing and why we're reaching them, I think it's the next level.
Yeah, and I think you're very spot on with your question. So that's the whole point of this exercise, right? It's like, okay, you're speaking to a doctor, but what do you know about this doctor, right? And your question about what is their experience, what, how do they feel? What is it like when they walk in the office in the morning? That's exactly the type of elements that would encourage you to think about before you go in there and tell your story. Okay, so we're going to move and start working a little bit with that. Okay, we're going to do just that, what I call the audience analysis. And I want you to think about the next time you'll need to tell your story where the stakes are high. So not the next Saturday barbecue, okay? But when you've got fairly high stakes, who will your audience be? In other words, who are you going to talk to? And I know you just had a presentation on health economics, so that high stake audience might be an HTA buddy. Okay, we're here to play around. That might be the audience you want to choose for the exercise. Okay, and once you know who you're going to talk to next, I want you to ask yourself the following question. Stay with me. First thing, I want you to ask yourself, what do they expect? Okay, and what they expect from your story is basically the basic requirements that you'll need to hear. We talked about before, bad presentation are unrelatable. So knowing what they expect will start building this rapport, okay? And what their expectations are based on might be many things. It might be based on the last time they spoke to you. It might be based on the last time they spoke to your patient group. It might be the last time they spoke to a patient group, right? So think a little bit about that. Then you move down one level to what is it that they want. So you're walking into a room to have a conversation. You want something, but surely they also want something from the conversation. So what is it that they want? And I'd like you to contrast this with what is it that they need. And the way it's a bit complicated, this one, but the way I like to explain it is the wants are the conscious needs, right? So the thing that people will be able to voice, this is what I want. And the needs are something that might be more unconscious, that they might not be aware that they actually need, okay? So for example, if we take the example of a nurse, what they might want is to know how you've been doing after you received your treatment. But actually what they might need to hear is your mental state in which you are before your visit, so that she can be better prepared to welcome you. And it's okay if you don't get it, don't here to experiment. The important part here is that you spend some time thinking about your audience. And then the last point, when you've done the expectation, the wants and the needs, is what we call in the business the within, or the what's in it for them. What is this one thing that makes them care? Why do they care? Why would they listen to you? Okay? Any question on the model so far? Okay, so my recommendation here is go with it, play with it, spend a couple of times, a couple of minutes thinking about this. I'm going to give you 8 minutes. You all have pen and paper, I think. So I want you to write on your pen, on your paper, who your audience is, and jot down a few words next to expect, want, need, and what's in it for them. So I believe we have a question on Zoom that somebody needs more clarification between the wants and the needs. So I'm going to try to differentiate them again. So what we mean, basically, the way to look at these 4 bullet points is going deeper and deeper into the people's motivations. Okay, so what we mean by wants is really, you're going into a room to talk to a doctor, okay? There's a reason why the doctor is accepting to speak to you, and that's the thing that he would voice himself, okay? It's like, what I want from this conversation is this, okay? And the needs to differentiate them from the wants is not necessarily something that doctors will be able to voice or put words on, and that might not even be something that doctor is aware of, right? So think a little bit about it. Maybe it's like when you teach something, right? People want to know 2 + 2 = 4, for example, but actually what they need to know is to understand why 2 + 2 = 4 and not 5 and not 6. Is this better the second?
And if you're writing to someone else, their needs.
Yeah, so I don't mean this as being prescriptive, right? We're not like putting words into people's mind. Read this exercise is to help you understand who is in the room when you walk into the room. That's the simplest way to see it. And as I mentioned before, don't get too hooked on the difference between the wants and the needs. What really is important is you get a better understanding of who you're going to talk to and why do they care about what you have to say. All right, so that makes more or less 8 minutes. It's okay if you haven't been into details into those 4 points. You're gonna get a chance later on to keep fine-tuning this if you need to, okay? We've spent some time looking at who we're talking to. Now let's turn to yourself, right? And the question you need to ask yourself at that moment is, what is the purpose of sharing your story? Okay, so for example, in my case, I had a couple of conversations with Jeanette and Zoe to understand who would be in the room, right? So patient advocates in lupus have a fair amount of understanding of storytelling, are fairly advanced or quite advanced in advocacy, right? And my purpose today, or my objective, is to give you a model and set of tools to help you build your story with your audience in mind. Okay? And so you may have different purposes, right? Your purpose might be to educate in a formal way. So you might be invited to talk at a pharma industry event, for example, and explain to people what is it like to live with lupus, what is it like to live with a chronic disease, okay? It might be that your objectives or your purpose of telling your story is for advocacy purposes, right? You want to advocate for better access, might be it. Or you've been invited to share a personal testimony, right? To a class of students that want to know more about what it's like to live with your condition, okay? That's a spectrum. I'm not saying these are always true and only these are true, but that's a couple of examples of what your purpose might be when you go out there and tell your story. So now I want to do another little exercise, taking the same situation as before, right? I want you to ask yourself, what are your objectives? Or what is your purpose? Why are you going in the room to tell your story? Okay? In other words, what is it that you need to achieve? And you've got S in parentheses, because I would recommend you to have only one objective, because you can only achieve as much as you can with the time that you have given. But it might be that your situation requires you to achieve multiple things, right? So I'm going to make the bold assumption that now that you know who you're talking to, you've got a fairly fair understanding of what you're trying to achieve. So I'll give you 2 minutes to write down your purpose for your next high-stake story. Are we good with the purpose? You all found your purpose? Okay, so I'm gonna move on in the presentation. Again, we have a better understanding of who we're going to talk to. We've got a better understanding of why we're talking to them and what we want to achieve. Now we're going to look at knowing who is in the room, why you're talking, what is going to go into your story, and in which way you're going to deliver it. Here's a little roadmap, once you know your audience and your purpose, to help you select the key elements of your story, right? And that's one we give to you. Feel free to use it. You don't have to, but here's how we would recommend you to go about it, okay? First, create a timeline, okay? And we'll see how we do this, and we can see what can go in your timeline. And then what we would love you to do is to compare your experience with the results of the 2020 Living with Lupus survey. And I believe all of you have received the survey results. If you haven't, raise your hand. Perfect, everybody has them. And then once you've got your content, it might be time to create a visual support. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then once you've got your visual support ready, it's going to be time to rehearse. Timeline. Your timeline doesn't need to be complicated. The simplest way to put it is what happens before your diagnosis, what happens at the time of your diagnosis, and then what happens after your diagnosis. And here are a few prompts to help you think through that. Okay? So at the time of the pre-diagnosis, you could say something unique about yourself, right? It can be your favorite food, your favorite hobby, your favorite band, what you like to do on a Sunday, anything that is personal and that will create an emotional connection between you and the people you're talking to. You can also talk a little bit about your life circumstances, right? I was raising my 2 children. I was working a 9 to 5, 5 days a week. I was enjoying life with my dog. Who knows? Just to put a little bit of context and start bringing character to your story. And then you can also describe when did you realize something was wrong and how did that make you feel? And that's very important. It's interesting from a psychological standpoint. You may not remember what you said or what you heard at a given point in time, but you will be more likely to remember how you felt, right? So build on that. We mentioned before, elements of a good presentation are passion, okay? Passion is a feeling. That's something that you can bring into your story as well. And as I like to say, passion is contagious. So as much as you can bring it in, bring it in. At the time of the diagnosis, you can describe how your diagnosis went or what your symptoms were, right? Did it take a long time? Did you get the right diagnosis in the first place? And how many different diagnoses did you receive before you got the correct one? Okay? And after your diagnosis, how has your diagnosis changed the way you live, right? And what are your biggest challenges at the moment? We mentioned it before, good element of the stories includes characters, tension, and a quest. You're the hero of your own journey, right? And you're the hero who goes through the journey, goes through a set of challenges, right? Ups and downs, comes out transformed. What has living with an autoimmune disease taught you, right? A story serves a purpose, and usually a story has a moral and a lesson to teach. So what lesson can you teach others, right? And if it's not a lesson, then what advice can you give somebody who was just diagnosed or has health issues based on your own experience? And the last thing that we can encourage you to think about is name this one thing you would like to tell somebody about living with lupus. And if we go back to the model before, that might be this what's in it for me element, right? This aha moment that will make people care. So these are just a few prompts to help you think through. We've got, oh, okay. Sorry, my bad. Then once you've got your timeline sorted out and you've got this type, these elements of experiences that you want to bring into your stories, we really want you to compare it with the data from the 2020 Living with Lupus survey results. Okay, because it's one thing and it's a great thing to tell people, listen, this is my story and that this is what I experience right now, and that's why it's important. But it's even more powerful to say, this is my story, but look, that's the story of everybody in Switzerland. Or even more powerful, that's the story of most people in Europe. I'm not alone. Okay, so today, I don't think you're going to have time to do this thorough analysis, but when you go home, make sure to take some time doing this. Once you've got your content, create a, and I purposely put visual support and not PowerPoint in there, because not everything needs to be on a PowerPoint, right? And I think that depends very much on who your audience will be, who are you going to talk to, but also, are you going to talk in person? Are you going to be at a coffee table? Are you going to be virtual, right? So think about your visual support. Might be a PowerPoint, might be just a set of pictures, okay? For the sake of the argument with the PowerPoint, if we want to create a PowerPoint, here are a couple of thoughts for you. First, this is not how you want your PowerPoint to look. Right? So avoid too much text, avoid technical language. You said it before, right? Abbreviation, long, you said there was something about, light slides, okay? So you don't want this. One thing you can do to reduce the amount of text, right, is to approach your PowerPoint as a story itself, right? And think about, how would I present it to my friends? Right? And then it becomes quite naturally that to your friends, you're not presenting a set of data, but you're more presenting a story, right? When you go back home on Tuesday, hopefully you can go back home on Tuesday with the strike, you're not going to show everybody the agenda of the conference today. But most likely what you can say is like, oh, I attended this great presentation with that person said this, that was eye-opening, right? So treat it a little bit of the same way. And one thing that can help you do that is use as many pictures as you can. The saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, is here for a reason. And you can choose, either you've got people trying to make up what is it that they want to say on slide and not listen to what you say, or you can use a powerful image behind you and tell the story of that image. And Jeanette, I want to thank you for sharing your image for the purpose of the argument here. So these are just a couple of notes on PowerPoint. I'll be with you tonight, so I'm more than happy to elaborate on what is a good PowerPoint, what is a bad PowerPoint. For the purpose of the presentation today, I'm going to move on. Now, I'm just going to share with you a couple of tips when it comes to developing content. The first one is the magic rule of 3. You may know the human brain, people are not made to remember many, many things. Actually, the average number of things that somebody can remember is 5. And I would argue it's more like 2 or 3, right? 1, that's a good one. And there's even a study, I think, that was run in the 60s that shows that out of a message, out of something that was shared, only 7% of what was recalled by the participants was about content. In other words, out of a message, less than 1 in 10 elements that people remember is about what you actually say. Okay, that's pretty grim, that's pretty sad. It also means that your content needs to be straight to the point and hitting the target. Okay, so my advice when you select your content is to stick to 3 items. Okay, why is it important? Because 1, 2, 3, not 4, not 5. It can be 1. 1 is great, but maximum 3. Okay, what I learned living in autoimmune disease I learned this, and that. Right? You don't need to share more because people won't remember. In conclusion, what I want you to remember is this, and that. Okay, magic rule of 3. I mentioned it before, stories have a clear structure. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the last thing I would want you to do is waste your end. Okay, you haven't spent so much time telling, getting your audience hooked with you, giving the bulk of your story to waste your end. And my advice here is that at the end of the story, put a clear call to action. We saw it before, right? Story serves a purpose, and you walk into the room with a purpose and something you want to achieve. Okay, so don't let that go. So in other words, after people have listened to you, what do you want them to do? And be assertive about it. And what I mean about assertive, I don't mean being obnoxiously aggressive, right? But I mean, don't be apologetic about it. When I was working in patient relations at Novartis, we would love when patient groups came to us with a plan and say, listen, this is what we want to achieve. This is how you can help us. Please do this and we'll do that in return. So much more powerful than somebody who sends a grant request from 10K and then goes on to live the rest of their year. Okay, call to action. Now, who's never heard of Pixar? Pretty much everybody, right? And there's a reason. It's because they're phenomenal at building and creating amazing stories. And they're insanely successful. And the basis of their success is a very simple framework that I want to introduce to you today. Something tells me you all know this framework already, right? And all of the Pixar movies that are blockbusters are being created using this framework. In other words, all of their stories follow the same structure and all of their stories are incredibly successful. Okay? If we take Finding Nemo, for example, everybody knows Finding Nemo? Yeah, do you like the movie? Yeah, I love it too. This is how it goes. So once upon a time, there was a widowed fish named Marlin living with his son, Nemo. Every day, Marlin was reminding Nemo of the danger of the oceans. Until one day, in an act of defiance, Nemo swims in the great ocean. And because of that, Nemo is captured and put into a fish tank in Sydney. And because of that, Marlin sets off an adventure and makes new friends on the way. And because of that, can go for a long time, until finally, Marlin and Nemo are reunited and learn that the basis of love is trust. It's really not complicated, and it works quite well. And that's the framework that I want you to work with in the next 25 minutes or so. Any question about how this works? On the Zoom, all good? Okay, perfect. So it's, yes.
We have to start with once upon a time.
Okay, so the question is, do we have to start with once upon a time there was? No, we don't need to be that cheesy. But the point of this structure is that you start with life as normal. This is what was happening, right? And then suddenly something happened. And because of that something, many, many things happened, right? So the way you can look at it is the once upon a time and every day was your pre-diagnosis phase, right? Until one day you experienced symptoms. And because of that, you went through your diagnosis phase. And because of that, until these are the current challenges, and this is why I need you to do that. For example, I don't know who your audience is, I don't know what your purpose are, right? But this is one way to look at it. Any other questions? Okay, great. So in the next 10 minutes or so, you all received, I think, the framework. As a reminder, you don't have to write on the framework, but I want you to think about those elements of your personal experience that could go into this structure in light of your audience and your purpose. Okay? So I'm going to put a timer 10 minutes, and then what we're going to do at the end of the 10 minutes is we're going to find a partner and we're going to practice telling a story to each other. And it's okay if the story is not, finalized. That's something that you can do on the way. All right. Good? 10 minutes. Same with me here in the room. I saw people sharing, telling stories. That's great. I've got one question for you. Who heard a great story? Yeah? Do you? I guess in the Zoom as well. You can't see, but in the room, pretty much everybody put their hands up, so that's great. Would you mind sharing what you heard? Unmuted, so that's just between all of us in the next 5 minutes. Thank you very much for sharing. So I love it that in as little time as 20 minutes, you've been able to come up with stories like the ones we've heard, and you've been able to bring a structure to what you want to share with everybody around you. And it was great because we saw in the last example, she built a character. We talked about great elements of the story, right? A hero's villain characters. You brought some dialogue. You know, I was discussing with my doctor, and he said, that was like, okay, these as well are great elements that make your story alive. So good job to everybody. I think you can give yourself another round of applause. All right, I said it before, timekeeper, I need to move us forward. Keep this framework in mind, right? You can use it whenever you want. It works for everything. You don't need to use once upon a time, but think about the structure and how your story unfolds. Okay, so we talked about the audience, we talked about your objective, we talked about the type of content you want to share. Now let's talk very quickly about how you're going to get your story out. Rehearse and make sure you stick to your limitation. I'm going to start with the limitation, okay? Before you go into your presentation, ask yourself, what are the circumstances? Are you going to present in person, or are you going to tell your story virtually, right? If it's in person, think about the venue. So for example, before I walked in today, I had a couple of conversations with Zoe to understand what is the room setup. Can I have flip charts in the room? Am I going to have a handheld microphone? Am I going to have a headset? Is there going to be a stage, right? So all of this I can prepare in advance, right? So everything that you can prepare in advance, it's bonus for you, okay? Think as well, I said it before, I believe, depending on the venue, are you going to be able to use a visual support? Will you be able to project? If you won't, will you create a PowerPoint? No. Right? Bring a couple of pictures. You may bring the survey results from the Living with Lupus survey, for example. Another very important point coming to the circumstances is how you're feeling the day you're presenting. Are you feeling tired? How is your mood? Are you upset? Are you feeling down? And if that's the case, what is your plan B? Okay, can you pull yourself back together? Do you need to ask somebody to come in and tell your story in your stead? Or do you need to reschedule your conversation? And really the message that I want to carry here is take care about yourself, okay? Don't feel pressurized to go into a conversation if that's just not the right day. Nobody will be mad at you for that. Don't use a word if you're not sure about the meaning, right? Nobody is expecting you to be medical experts. You're experts in living with lupus. And so in that regard, just stick with what you know, okay? And using words with which you're familiar will also help with your flow and the way you naturally tell your story, okay? And the reverse is also true. So if you're presenting to people who have no idea what lupus is, or have no idea about chronic conditions or what an autoimmune disease is, do not use the jargon. Or if you're using the jargon, then make sure to explain it. This is my favorite part. And usually that's everybody's most hated part, rehearsal. It is absolutely critical that when you walk into a high-stake presentation, you rehearse it. Okay, couple of thoughts. First of all, think about the time that you have, right? Is it a 5-minute story? Is it a half an hour conversation? Is it a 90 minutes training, right? And when you rehearse, use a timer so that you know what you're doing in terms of time. Now I'm going to make a bold prediction. Is most likely when you go into your rehearsal, you'll notice that you have way too much content and you go over time. And if you go over time twice, it might be time for you to kill your darlings. And what I mean by killing your darlings, we learned today the triangle. We start with the audience, always, okay? And that might be a lesson for you today. The story you're going to tell is not about you. You may be the hero of your own story, but the story is about your audience, okay? And there might be elements in your stories that you find extremely important. And I'm not saying they're not, they're really important. But are they resonating with the people you're talking to? And are they serving your purpose? Okay, so if you realize your story too long, kill your darlings. Now I'm going to share with you what I call the best rehearsal process. And this is how it goes. This is how it goes. You rehearse the first 30 seconds of your story. Then you bin it. You rehearse the first 60 seconds of the story. Then you bin it, and then you rehearse the first 90 seconds or minute and a half of your story. And what it does is in only 3 minutes, and I think we can all agree that 3 minutes is not a big investment, right? You'll have rehearsed your beginning 3 times. And you'll have gone over the stumble through and it's like, I'm not sure what I want to say, okay? And you'll have your spot in beginning, right? Structure of the story, beginning, middle, and end. If you're working with the Pixar framework, the great thing about this framework is it gives you a structure that follows naturally from one point to the other. So if you're spot on with your beginning, it will kickstart this chain reaction, and it's going to be easier for you to tell your story, okay? Last point, don't rehearse alone, okay? Telling yourself your story in your shower the night before your presentation might be rehearsing, but that's not necessarily the smartest way to rehearse. So as much as you can, please do rehearse with a partner. You'll get valuable feedback from them. They might help you kill your darlings, okay? They might also share a different perspective, something that you find interesting, which actually is not that interesting or not interesting for the purpose you're trying to serve. Okay, so as much as you can, rehearse with somebody, at least once, and then you can rehearse on your own. Body language, it's also part of the delivery. It's essentially 3 things. It's your face, it's your voice, and it's the rest of your body. But this is content for another course. We don't have time to go into detail into body language today, but I just wanted to acknowledge it. Dress the part. one thing which is really important whenever you're presenting, wear clothes in which you're comfortable. Okay, that's super important. That will put you at ease, that will remove an unnecessary level of stress, right? But remember the study that I mentioned before, that out of a message, only 7% of what is remembered is about the content. Well, guess what? The part that people remember the most is the way people look. Again, that might not be what you like to hear. It's slightly sad, but that's the truth. So how do you hack this? Well, my advice here is to dress the part. So when you go to tell your story, wear something that will make you stand out of the crowd, that will make you easily recognizable, right? And that will single you out. So, for example, one of my previous colleagues from the agency is a master at networking. And whenever she was walking into a room to do networking, she was wearing red. And what it did is like, people may not remember her name, but then they're like, oh, I just had this great conversation with these people. Look with the lady in the jacket in red. Bam, she's recognizable and people remember her, okay? You might be wondering, that's not by chance, right? Whenever I go on stage or I go on site, I wear a bow tie. To the point that I've shown up on site without a bow tie, and the first question that I receive is, where's the bow tie? Okay, so I'm not trying to, it doesn't need to be extravagant, right? I don't ask you to wear a pink hat or feathers on your back, right? But something that's distinctive enough that will make you stand out of the crowd, and that will get you a long way. Okay, dress the part. Now, that's my last point for today. We've been operating in the virtual sphere for almost 3 years now, and it's not like it's going away anytime soon. We can see today with our friends on Facebook and on Zoom, right? So here are 3 things to help you manage that. First point, when you present virtually, that might be a bit counterintuitive, but the most important thing is your audio. It's not your webcam, right? If your webcam fails, people will still be able to hear what you say. If your microphone fails, all of your message is lost. So if you're looking into investing in some pieces of tech, my advice is invest in a microphone. Second most important is lighting. Okay, so think if you're presenting from home, where is your desk located? And if you're near a window, obviously don't sit with the window behind you. It will make you look dark, right? So sit facing the window or the light coming from the side. And if you're presenting at night, now you can see them pretty much everywhere. There's those lamps, right, that project a nice light on you, right? And the third point is what I refer to as framing. So think about where you sit in your audience screen. Again, you may not believe it, but I've seen presentation for an hour and a half, somebody presenting, and the only thing I could see was their eyes and their forehead. And nobody had the gut to tell them, sir, can you please just adjust your camera? Okay? And that's an easy fix. That's super easy, so think about it before. This one, that's a no-go. Messy background, don't do that. Another point which is important about the background, do not make it disturbing. And messy might be disturbing, but you may put something that you think is quite cool on it, but make sure that it's not distracting and somebody spends the whole presentation looking at your background and wondering, what is this thing they have behind you? Okay? So think about this. Neat background is great. White background always works. You can use virtual background if you want. Just watch out. Sometimes they're a bit wonky. Depends on your bandwidth as well. So just make that cool. It's common sense in the end. And then the last point, again, I made it at the beginning. Operating in the virtual sphere means we're operating with technology. And what technology does way too often is to fail. And here my advice is to get the elephant out of the room at the beginning. So do like I did at the beginning, just acknowledge it. Say, okay, We're here on Zoom. Might be that the technology fails. If it does, there's no need to panic. Just, log off, log back in. We're going to be here. Okay? Now I want you to take just a deep breath and reflect on everything you've seen in the past hour and a half. Okay? We learned about the model to help you select the right pieces of content for your story, right? We learned about the second model that helps you put this content in a structure that will maximize your impact. And we learned a few tips and tricks to deliver your content. Magic rule of 3, who had forgotten about it? Nobody, great. So putting it to practice. If there's 3 things that you need to remember from today, it's these ones. So first, always start with your audience in mind. Always, always, always. If there's a lesson from today, it's this one. Second, stories serve a purpose. You have a purpose for sharing your story. Be clear about what it is and be clear about your call to action at the end of it. And the last one, rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. Okay? I see people are taking pictures. I'm just going to leave it on it. And I believe you're going to get the slides at the end, right? All right. And with this, we came to the end of this training. I'd like to thank all of you for your participation and for welcoming me here today. Oh.
Yeah.
Mic drop. Well, anyway, I just wanted to thank you very much. You've got my contact details here. My name is Cyril Rachetta. You've got my email. You can find me on LinkedIn. And again, I want to thank all of you. Thank you so much, Jeanette, for inviting me to speak today. Thank you very much, Zoe and Amy, for the technical support, Alan as well. And with this, I want to hand back to Jeanette for her closing words. Thank you very much.
It's working. So thank you so much, Cyril. It was really, really wonderful to have your presentation. And I think even though we were so tired, everyone got something out of this, right? It was really engaging. So your presentation was great. And we have just a small token of appreciation, just a small thing. Belgian chocolate, doesn't love that.
Thank you.
And we really enjoyed it, and I'm sure this will be very helpful going forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone. So now you have some time off, and dinner will be served at 7:30. 7:30 in the dining area. Okay. So take a break, do what you need to do, lie down for a bit if you need to, yeah, walk around if you need to, and see you 7:30. No exercise. You can do this, Aldivina. You can stand up here and do some